Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching.
I hear voices.
When mental illness strikes, how should it be treated?
Could be. Also, he shows
As a biologically based disease that needs medical treatment?
intimidating, but he's a very nice person.
Or as a psychological disorder that demands changes in thoughts and behavior? Psychotherapy, this time on Discovering Psychology. When our car breaks down, we take it to a mechanic. But what happens when we break down? When our behavior becomes erratic or self-defeating, and our thoughts and emotions become disordered and painful? Whom do we turn to then? We might talk to a friend or a relative, a teacher, or a family physician. But if our problems continue to worsen, it's time to seek professional help.
Have you seen your parents recently?
I'm at that age where I'm beyond wanting to see them a great
Professional
deal.
treatment for mental illness is available from a wide range of health specialists: clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, psychological counselors, and psychiatrically trained social workers. In fact, the vast majority of professionals working in the field of psychology are practicing therapists. But mental problems, like physical illnesses, vary greatly in kind and severity. They may be limited to a fear of heights, or they may completely disrupt an individual's functioning. There are almost as many varieties of therapies as there are mental disorders, over 250. We can start by dividing therapies into two major groups: the biomedical approach and the psychological approach. Biomedical therapy focuses on changing some aspect of our physical functioning. This approach is based on the premise that certain mental disorders are diseases, and that treatment must be biologically based to reverse or eradicate them. Sophisticated imaging techniques like this CAT scan are often used to pinpoint the problem. Biomedical therapists are psychiatrists, neurobiologists, and others who specialize in isolating and identifying specific disease states that are assumed to underlie depression, schizophrenia, and other mental disorders. Because the ecology of the mind is held in such a delicate balance, it can be upset by biochemical events. Mental disorders are assumed to be the observable end products of these disturbances. One of the most radical treatments in the biomedical approach has been psychosurgery. The best-known form of psychosurgery is the prefrontal lobotomy, cutting the nerve fibers that connect the brain's frontal lobes with its thalamus. The typical candidate for a lobotomy was an agitated schizophrenic or someone with extreme compulsions and intense anxiety. The operation eliminated these symptoms by, in effect, disconnecting the individual from traumas of the past and anxieties about the future.
You tell me a little something about yourself.
All right.
You were 19 years old.
That's right.
And you were in a first-year college.
That's right. Catholic Sisters College.
Speak up.
Catholic Sisters College. The other place is Peabody University in Baltimore.
Now, you got sick about when? Do you remember?
When did I get sick? Sometime in June.
And what happened to you after you went to the hospital, do you know?
Uh-huh.
What was it that happened to you?
I was fighting in a war.
What sort of war was it?
First of all, it was the Christian War.
But the operation also took away the ability to remember clearly and plan ahead. Emotional flatness, childlike emotions, and a lack of concern for the opinions of others replaced earlier symptoms of guilt, anger, and anxiety. Because the cure was often worse than the illness, its use is now restricted to only the most extreme cases where no other treatment has helped. Another controversial biomedical treatment is electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. Shock therapy, as it's known, has been hailed for its effectiveness as the most powerful antidepressant treatment available for patients who can't tolerate medication. Although misuse of ECT has been criticized for causing memory loss in some patients. As effective as shock therapy can be, it can only help a limited number of people. The real revolution in biomedical therapy, the treatment that has reached the greatest number of people, has been the use of drugs to treat mental and behavioral disorders. When I was a graduate student back in the 1950s, before the advent of drug therapy, I visited a mental hospital for the first time. It was a horrible sight. Patients screamed constantly. They exhibited themselves. They exploded in violent rages. They smeared excrement on the walls. Some withdrew into zombie-like states, while others had to be put in straitjackets to keep them from hurting themselves or other patients. But all that changed in the mid-1950s with the advent of tranquilizing drugs.
I hear voices.
Chlorpromazine was the first miracle drug that worked on many of the symptoms found in schizophrenic patients: delusions, hallucinations, social withdrawal, and agitation. Another antipsychotic drug, lithium, regulates the extreme mood swings of manic depressive disorders, while anti-anxiety drugs relax and tranquilize patients. Drug therapies not only suppress the symptoms of mental disorders and bring relief from suffering, but also make it possible to use psychotherapy with patients who previously could not be reached. The danger with drug therapy, however, is that overworked hospital staffs may merely tranquilize their patients and leave it at that, or that individuals may over-medicate themselves to cope with everyday life. Valium, the nation's most popular tranquilizer, is also addictive. It's taken every day by over 8 million Americans, many of whom have given up on trying to deal with the sources of their stress. If chemotherapy was the last great revolution in biomedical therapy, genetics may be the next one. Evidence that some mental disorders are inherited has already led to genetic counseling, in which families at risk are counseled about the probability of passing on defective genes.
Now, I understand that Stephen has 7 children?
7. No, 8.
Oh, so
we left Joshua out.
Where does Joshua go?
It goes between.
Chronic schizophrenia, some kinds of mental retardation and depression, and Alzheimer's disease are all disorders to which genetic factors contribute. Recently, a team of researchers identified the actual gene on chromosome number 11, which, when defective, accounts for one type of depression. The research was carried out among families in the Amish community in Pennsylvania. But the results were complicated by the fact that at least half of those with the defective gene did not have the disorder. It's an example of biological biasing, in which people who are genetically primed for a disorder are much more likely to get it than the general population, but only if they are also under prolonged or intense psychological stress. We've seen how the biomedical approach to mental illness works. But what about the psychological approach, the one we're most familiar with? How would a psychotherapist deal with a problem such as depression?